This is an attempt to translate my tutorial ChoiceScript game into a Twine SugarCube version. Let's begin by choosing the right story format. Harlow is the default, but we want to use SugarCube. Sometimes when I put in space or apostrophe in the project name, the Twine editor would crash, so I'm trying to avoid using them here. The straightforward way to display the title and the author name is to write them on the starting passage, but SugarCube's default layout has special passages just for those information. Story title, with capitalized S and T and no space between them, is the name of the special passage that stores the project title for the Twine editor. Story display title, with capitalized S, D, and T and no spaces between them, is the name of the special passage that can be used to display an alternative version of the project title. It's used when you want to change the title without confusing the Twine editor. Do not add any extra markup tags to these titles such as bold or italicize. They can be formatted in other ways. Story author, with capitalized S and A and no space between them, is the name of the special passage that stores the author name. If you press play near the bottom right of the editor, you will see the title and author name displayed in the default navigation panel. For this video, we will not work on any customization to keep things simple. Story init, with capitalized S and I and no space between them, is the name of the special passage that can be used for variable declaration. In ChoiceScript, this is similar to where you use *create syntax to declare and initialize global variables. Technically, this passage is not required, and that in SugarCube, you can create a global variable anytime you want. However, for larger projects, you may have a harder time checking all the global variables in the game if their declaration are spread out in different passages instead of one. SugarCube's specific keywords are wrapped between double angle brackets. Think of this like the asterisk symbol for ChoiceScript keywords. The first SugarCube keyword, or macro, you see here, is set, which you may recognize from ChoiceScript. The difference here is that you can chain several set statements in a row, separated by comma. In ChoiceScript, you use *comment keyword to indicate that the current line is not game content. In SugarCube, you can write comments between /% and %/ or between /* and */. The former way is SugarCube specific, while the latter can be used in JavaScript and CSS. Don't worry about those for now, just keep this tidbit in mind. Unlike ChoiceScript, there are often multiple ways to accomplish the same goal in SugarCube. Wrapping link text between double square brackets is one way to create links to navigate between passages. If you have ever edited Wikipedia entries, this syntax may be familiar. Here I want to simplify the target passage name instead of using the full sentence go to beginning. So I use -- syntax to point to the actual name of the next passage. If you use this linking method, the Twine editor will draw an arrow to the target passage automatically. If you change the name of the target passage, the editor will update this name in all passages that are linking to it. But this convenience is not afforded in the other direction. So here, if I change the target passage to something else, the editor will create another passage instead and point the arrow there. If you delete the target passage, the arrow will show an X as the target. You can fix this by manually recreating the target passage or type in a different name for the link. If it matches any existing passage name, the arrow will be connected again. The play button in the editor will begin at the starting passage, which has the rocket icon over it. If the browser window is sufficiently small, you may notice that the default navigation panel is stowed to the left side, which you can expand by clicking on the right arrow icon near the top. The default navigation panel will show the title, author name as we provided before, as well as two menu options, Saves and Restart. Notice that this link has a few blank lines before it, which I don't want. By default, any line in the passage will be interpreted as a line in the output, even if that line has no visible content. We can use a backslash at the end of a line to tell the engine to not start a new line, but then your code might become filled with distracting backslashes. One way to control line breaks in SugarCube is to use a NOBR tag. This tells that passage to not break lines unless we write the HTML break tag, which is $BR $. Note that this is HTML markup syntax, not a SugarCube keyword. Non-code content can be copy and pasted directly into the passage. SugarCube accepts a limited amount of markdown syntax, which can save a little bit of typing sometimes. For example, you can write a bullet point list using asterisk symbol instead of using HTML markup to display an unordered list. But because it is relatively easy to break the bullet point format, you might end up needing HTML markup anyway. There are multiple ways to achieve the linking effect. Double brackets and arrow sign is one of the simplest ways to achieve it. Later I will show another method. There are multiple ways to handle passage flow as well. You can have each of these choice links go to a new passage that represents the choice that was picked. This is clear and easy to maintain, especially for short projects. In the choice script code, I have all three choices proceed to the same label named postgame, and in SugarCube, I can make a passage to represent that. I can have each of the choice representing passages link to postgame passage, but I can also just include the content of postgame inside each of those passages. The result is one less click for the reader. When you hover over a passage in the Twine editor, the third option on the context menu is Test Story starting here. Clicking this will enter test mode instead of regular play mode, and you will see code alongside displayed text, as well as a debug bar near the bottom right. To see the regular content without the extra code, uninstall the debug bar, click on Views to toggle it off. There are situations where the Twine editor will not generate an arrow connecting passages. The include macro is one such situation. If you want an arrow to show, a trick I figured out is to write the double bracket link syntax anywhere in the initiating passage, but mark it as a SugarCube comment, which will make it invisible to the story, but not the editor. Since we are on the topic of arrows, note that despite how useful it is to simulate a flowchart, it is a graphical user interface element that will slow down the Twine editor once there are maybe 500 or 600 of them in your story. So be aware of this potential downside. What if you want to reduce the number of passages without changing the underlying story? In this case, because all three choices lead back onto the same narrative branch, which in the choice script version is the part of the story labeled postgame. Another way to handle the passage flow in the SugarCube version is to have one passage named postgame and link each choice to it. Using double bracket link syntax, you can change the variables without needing to use the set macro. This is another case of having multiple ways to do the same thing in SugarCube. Here I'm showing you a shorthand to write an addition to a variable, but the long-form way of writing $skill equals $skill plus 1 is perfectly fine. Writing the variable name with the symbol prefix is enough to tell the engine to display its value. Let's check if the code is working for the variable changes. One thing I haven't moved over after changing the method of passage flow is the short flavor text that accompanies each choice. So compared to writing the text directly in the passage, I will put the text inside a variable, then display that variable. I can add this change next to the changes done to the skill or relationship variable. You can see that I didn't have to declare this response variable in the story init passage before I can use it. This is not a good practice, but just to show that it can be done. I don't have an example here, but you can use the unset macro to delete any variable from the game when it won't be used anymore. Instead of using Markdown syntax, I can use HTML markup in the passage to display an unordered list. If you are not familiar with HTML markup, just follow the example. The reason I want to use HTML here is because what I'm planning to do to the third choice will put some unwanted space between the second and third line. And if I put a NOBR tag on the passage, the Markdown interpretation will stop working due to each line being interpreted as the same line. On the other hand, the HTML method will still show the bullet point list correctly. Another way to create a link is by using the link macro. The advantage of this method is readability when you need to set many variables when a choice link is clicked. You will see what I mean soon. Notice that I have the SugarCube documentation page open, which is not a tutorial for beginners, but just a reference page for when you need to double-check syntax. Remember that once you use the NOBR tag, you must explicitly tell the code to break a line when you need to start on the next line. Macros like set only come by itself, while some macros like if or link come in pairs with an opening one and a closing one. Other code can be put in between the pair. The closing one is indicated by a backslash before the macro name. To simulate asterisk selectable underscore if in ChoiceScript, my first attempt will only show the choice link if the condition is true. It won't be the same as disabling the link, but I will work on that in another video. In SugarCube, I can use the regular less than and greater than symbols to represent the comparison, but because they look similar to the angle brackets, I prefer another syntax, which is LT for less than, GT for greater than. You can check the SugarCube documentation page for details. The if statement should evaluate to false at this time, thus you don't see the third choice. I will change the relationship value before that if statement, and then it will evaluate to true and show the third choice. Now let's try to translate the content of ChoiceScript_stat scene file to a SugarCube version. You can name this passage anything, but I'll name it stats for now. In ChoiceScript, a temporary variable is created using the *temp keyword. In SugarCube, a temporary variable is one where it's preceded by an underscore instead of a $sign symbol. Its scope is anywhere the current passage is visible, which means either when the current passage is being displayed to the reader, or if it's included by another passage that is being displayed. External links can be written in the same way as internal links between passages. The basic difference is that the default SugarCube styling puts an extra icon near external links to warn the reader that the link will go to another website. You can override this styling using Cascading Style Sheet, or CSS, but this video will not cover this topic. In the default SugarCube user interface, there is a section in the left navigation panel above the Saves and Restart buttons that you can add internal links to through a special passage called Story Menu with capitalized S and M and no space between the two words. I will create this passage and put the link to stats passage inside, and then you can access the stats like you could in the ChoiceScript version. This is not my preferred method of accessing the stats page, but for the purpose of this video, I want to keep things as simple as possible to lower the barrier of entry as much as I can.